In the ever-evolving world of education, best practices and instructional theories seem to come and go at a dizzying pace. One week, a particular pedagogical framework is the gold standard. The next, it's replaced by a fresh perspective. Does this mean that everything we once relied on is now obsolete? Not quite. While constant change may feel like a challenge to the stability of educational philosophy, the growing intersection of education and technology makes adaptability more important than ever. One concept that bridges foundational theory with modern application is cognitive load theory. Understanding this framework offers a practical blueprint for designing clear, accessible instructional materials that enhance learning. Let's take a closer look. Boasting roots in the world of human psychology and educational philosophy alike, cognitive load theory is a learning framework that's almost impossible to fully separate from instructional message design practices. The theory, which we'll call CLT for the rest of this presentation, revolves around a few essential truths. CLT suggests that humans have limited cognitive capacity at any given time. In other words, it is the core assumption of this theory that human beings can only process a finite amount of information in our short-term memory. On the other hand, the potential capacity of long-term memory is assumed to be nearly limitless. So, what do short-term and long-term memory have to do with instructional design principles? As educational psychologist John Sweller, who we'll meet a little bit later, succinctly puts it, without an understanding of human cognitive architecture, instruction is blind. This concept is widely recognized in the educational community and is typically understood through three key distinctions, three different modes of cognition that the brain engages with when processing new information: intrinsic cognitive load, germane cognitive load, and extraneous cognitive load. A good way to imagine cognitive load in general is in terms of digital storage space. So let's take a look at the first categorization. As the name suggests, intrinsic cognitive load refers to the inherent difficulty and complexity of any given subject matter. For example, an advanced employee training for mechanics at a nuclear plant discussing complex theoretical practices would inherently take up a lot of space in that person's working memory due to its sheer complexity. In contrast, a welcome session introducing these same employees to basic workplace safety measures would take up less space as the content is simpler in nature. Generally, intrinsic load is seen as a neutral type of cognitive load, but heavily relies on the management of the other load types to stay neutral. It's also seen as almost impossible to change. Nuclear mechanics will always be legitimately challenging, right? However, they can be alleviated by thoughtful organization, sequencing, and presentation. But there's another major factor at play here. Let's say you are technically a new employee at this company, but you've completed your doctorate thesis in nuclear mechanics. You are likely going to have a much easier time synthesizing this new advanced information than someone who has made a complete career change and has no background in nuclear mechanics. This is where the germane cognitive load comes into play. Germane load refers to the mental effort required to create new knowledge bases or schemas. No matter the supposed complexity or simplicity of the information at hand, each individual person experiences the germane requirements of each task differently. So let's say that you are that expert nuclear mechanic, bringing years of knowledge to a new work setting. While you may have a solid handle on the complex information and are in a position to build schemas with relative ease, you may find yourself running into problem after problem with your new company's internal communication system. You find that you have to navigate to multiple platforms using several different identification credentials, and by the time you finally made it to the training modules, you are spent. You have, unfortunately, been visited by extraneous load. Extraneous cognitive load includes any factor that is distracting, time-wasting, or in any way preventing the learner from acquiring new knowledge in a timely, succinct manner. Fortunately, scholars regard this type as the most malleable when in the hands of skilled instructional designers and teaching personnel. So we know that none of these cognitive load types can be entirely avoided and, in the case of germane, for example, are actually helpful to the process of learning. This might lead you to wonder, what are the ideal states of each cognitive load type in an effective and theoretically sound learning environment? Practitioners who ascribe to CLT aim to 1. Simplify intrinsic load as much as possible without watering down important, complex concepts that are integral to mastery of the subject. 2. Maximize germane load, creating, providing, and monitoring interventions and supports that allow individuals who have successfully acquired new knowledge to synthesize it with previously held knowledge via schema construction. And finally, to reduce extraneous load, eliminating as many barriers to entry as are in the control of the practitioner, including but not limited to technological aspects of information access. Theories this complex, as we know, just don't pop up overnight. So let's take a brief look at the history and the who's who of cognitive load theory. George Armitage Miller was the first psychologist to take a particular interest in human cognition, deviating from the well-respected behaviorism perspective. Along with inventing the entire field of cognitive psychology, he co-founded the Center for Cognitive Studies at Harvard in 1960. A few years earlier, in 1956, Miller conducted a groundbreaking study referred to as the magical number 7 plus or minus 2, radically changing educational psychology's understanding of working memory. In short, the study proposed that only 7 individual pieces of information, give or take 2 depending on other factors, can occupy a person's working memory at any given time. Furthermore, he introduced the concept of chunking, the process of grouping individual pieces of information into larger units, allowing each chunk to occupy just one of those 7 available memory slots at a time. A few decades later, John Sweller took Miller's cognitive psychology and adapted its essential truths as they applied to education, resulting in cognitive load theory. It was also Sweller who originally proposed the distinctions of intrinsic, germane, and extraneous cognitive loads, allowing for a more thorough and accurate discussion of research surrounding this topic. In a 1988 study, Sweller demonstrated the positive effects of utilizing worked examples as a direct means of reducing extraneous load. Fred Paz was a big fan of Sweller's work regarding the utilization of worked examples, and made his contribution to the field by suggesting a type of worked example use termed fading, in which instruction would gradually remove scaffolding previously provided by worked examples at a pace concurrent with the learner's capacity to prove that they could work on their own. Deeply interested in the relationship between mental effort and observable learning outcomes, Paz coined the term instructional efficiency as a means of discussing and measuring the efficacy of CLT-based interventions. In a 1994 study, Paz, along with other researchers, proved that measurement methods such as self-report scales and dual task techniques were effective in gathering quantifiable data related to cognitive load. Richard Mayer took cognitive load theory into the digital age with his addition of multimedia principles, resulting in the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. Mayer's professional and academic contributions to the field of CLT largely contributed to the multimedia standards used in the digital learning space today. In a 2003 study with Roxana Moreno, the 9 Principles for Reducing Cognitive Load was born. This seminal paper serves as a principal guideline for instructional design of multimedia instruction with the explicit intent of reducing extraneous load at every possible point. So, what do these theoretical ideas look like in action? Let's take a look at some practical, hands-on tips for integrating CLT concepts into your instructional message design approach. First, simplify the intrinsic load of naturally challenging or complex information by segmenting the information, ensuring that it is all dispelled in an order that makes sense. Second, slowly increase the complexity of the information to ensure that prior knowledge has been completely digested and the learners are prepared for more advanced concepts before moving on. Third, make sure the learning space, specifically the digital learning space, is as tidy and efficient as possible. Instead of requiring learners to open multiple windows, remember lots of logins, and access several applications to complete a simple task, streamline this to the best of your ability. Fourth, be mindful of how images and text interact on the page, digital or otherwise. Remember, redundancy can be useful sometimes when used to promote accessibility, but images should always be related to the written content nearest to them. Fifth, provide learners with worked examples, especially for content like mathematics or complex tutorials with many steps, as this will reduce the extraneous load greatly. Worked examples also promote gradual cognitive independence. 6. When including narrated videos, be careful not to crowd the screen with unnecessary visuals or too much text to process in the amount of time that it is visible on the screen. Ultimately, CLT functions as a framework to create meaningful learning experiences that provide each learner with the ability to explain their own mental work and to construct schemas of knowledge that will be available to them at all times. Now the question is, how long will cognitive load theory enjoy its time in the sun before being overshadowed by a newer, catchier theory? There's no telling for sure, but as it has been built on fundamental concepts of human psychology, CLT lends itself to be adaptable, keeping up with us as we continue to identify, explore, and meet the ever-changing needs of a diverse world of learners.